Welcome to the world of science fiction where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. Ethan Blake sat hunched over his laptop in his dimly lit cabin as the wind howled outside like a feral beast. The ancient radiator wheezed pitifully in its losing battle against the sub-zero temperatures. He adjusted the thermostat for what felt like the 100th time that night, muttering under his breath, "Remote work paradise," he scoffed sarcastically as he wrapped another blanket around himself. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, trying to debug a stubborn piece of code that refused to cooperate. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the storm outside. Ethan jolted upright, his laptop nearly slipping off his lap. "What now?" he muttered, peering out through frost-covered windows. All he could see was darkness and swirling snow. Then came the pounding, a frantic knocking at his door that cut through the storm's roar like an alarm bell. He froze for a moment, heart racing. No one should be out in this weather. "Coming," he finally shouted as he grabbed a flashlight and shuffled toward the door. When he opened it, he was greeted by a sight so surreal that for a moment he thought he might have fallen asleep at his desk and started dreaming. A woman stood there, or something resembling one. Her skin was an iridescent violet hue that shimmered faintly even in the dim light of his porch lamp. Her silver hair whipped wildly around her face in the wind, framing eyes that gleamed like molten gold with vertical slits for pupils. "Help," she rasped through chattering teeth before collapsing into his arms. Instinct took over as Ethan dragged her inside and shut the door against the storm. Up close, he noticed she was trembling violently, despite wearing what looked like some kind of futuristic bodysuit made of metallic fabric. What are you?" he stammered as he laid her down on his couch. "Cold. Freezing," she managed through blue-tinted lips that stood out starkly against her purple complexion. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before grabbing every blanket he could find and piling them on top of her. But it wasn't enough. Her shivering only grew worse. "Human," she said suddenly, fixing him with those glowing eyes despite her weakened state. "Body heat. Only solution." Ethan blinked at her in confusion. "Wait. What?" She struggled to sit up but fell back against the couch cushions. "Your sleeping cocoon," she said urgently, pointing down his hallway with trembling fingers. "My bed?" he asked incredulously. "Yes. Now." She barked with surprising authority despite her condition. Ethan stared at her for a long moment before sighing deeply. "Fine," he muttered under his breath. "But this is officially the weirdest night of my life." He helped her down the hall toward his bedroom, while silently questioning every decision that had led him to this point. Little did he know this was only the beginning of an adventure that would change everything he thought he knew about life and humanity itself. Ethan Blake woke to a strange silence in his cabin. The storm had passed, leaving behind a blanket of snow that muffled the usual sounds of the forest. He stretched cautiously, aware of the alien woman, Zira, still curled up beside him under the covers. Her violet skin had regained some of its luster, and her breathing was steady, though her golden eyes remained closed. He slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to disturb her, and padded to the kitchen to make coffee. As he waited for the pot to brew, Ethan couldn't help but replay the events of the previous night in his mind. An alien warrior, exiled from her planet, crashing into his life during a snowstorm. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi novel. The smell of coffee seemed to rouse Zira. She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of his blankets like a regal cloak. Her glowing eyes scanned the room before settling on him. "Your dwelling is primitive," she said bluntly. "Good morning to you too," Ethan replied with a smirk. He poured her a mug of coffee and slid it across the counter. Zira sniffed it suspiciously before taking a cautious sip, her face contorted in disgust, and she set the mug down with a sharp clink. "This liquid is vile." Ethan chuckled. "It's coffee. An acquired taste." She ignored his comment and began exploring the kitchen, her movements graceful despite her imposing presence. She paused at the refrigerator, opening it, and peering inside with curiosity. "Your cooling system is inefficient," she remarked. "Welcome to Earth," Ethan said dryly. "We make do." Zira turned to him, her expression serious. "I require sustenance." Ethan gestured toward the fridge. "Help yourself." She examined its contents with a critical eye before selecting an apple and biting into it experimentally. Her golden eyes widened slightly as she chewed. "This is acceptable," she declared. Ethan watched her eat with a mix of fascination and amusement. Despite her alien appearance, there was something oddly human about her mannerisms. The way she tilted her head when considering something, or the way she tapped her fingers against the counter while waiting for him to speak. "So," he began hesitantly, "what's your plan? I mean, you're stranded here." Zira's expression hardened. "I have no plan." Her words hung heavily in the air. "My ship is beyond repair," she continued after a moment, "and my people will not retrieve me." Ethan frowned. "Why not?" "I am an exile," Zira said flatly. "To them, I am dead." He studied her face, noting the flicker of pain in her eyes despite her stoic demeanor. "That's harsh." "It is our way," she replied simply. Ethan leaned against the counter, trying to process what she told him. She was alone on a foreign planet with no resources, no allies, and no way home. And now she was in his kitchen eating apples and criticizing his appliances. "Well," he said finally, "you're welcome to stay here for now." Zira looked at him sharply, as if surprised by his offer. "You would shelter me?" "Sure," Ethan said with a shrug. "Not like I have much going on anyway." She studied him for a long moment before nodding curtly. "I accept your offer." Ethan couldn't help but smile at her formal tone. "Glad we cleared that up." Later that morning, Ethan's neighbor Ben stopped by to check on him after the storm. Zira hid in the bedroom while Ethan answered the door, trying to act normal despite the fact that an alien warrior was hiding just a few feet away. Ben glanced past Ethan into the cabin as they chatted, his curiosity piqued by what he thought was movement inside. "Everything okay?" Ben asked casually. "Yeah," Ethan said quickly, blocking Ben's view with his body. "Just working on some stuff." Ben raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. After offering to help clear Ethan's driveway later, he left without incident. When Ethan returned to the bedroom, Zira was standing by the window, watching Ben's SUV disappear down the road. "He suspects something," she said without turning around. "Nah," Ethan replied dismissively. "Ben's harmless." Zira turned to face him, her expression grim. "You cannot trust your kind." Ethan frowned at her words but decided not to argue. Instead, he asked about her people, the Tilari, and their society. As Zira spoke about her home planet and its rigid traditions, Ethan began to understand why she had been exiled. The Tilari valued order above all else, enforcing strict roles and expectations on their citizens. Zira had defied those expectations by refusing an arranged marriage meant to unite warring factions, a decision that had cost her everything. "I chose freedom over servitude," she said fiercely, "even if it meant exile." Ethan nodded slowly, admiring her courage despite the consequences she faced. Over the next few days, Zira began adapting to life on Earth, or at least life in Ethan's cabin. She explored every corner of his home with curiosity, asking endless questions about human technology and culture. Ethan found himself enjoying their conversations despite their occasional misunderstandings or cultural clashes. Zira's straightforwardness was refreshing compared to most people he knew. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace sharing stories about their respective worlds, Zira suddenly grew quiet. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked gently. She stared into the flames for a moment before speaking softly. "I endangered you by coming here." Ethan shook his head firmly. "You didn't know where else to go." "But my pursuers may come," she warned him. "They will not stop until I am found, or destroyed." Her words sent a chill down Ethan's spine, despite the warmth of the firelight. "We'll deal with that if it happens," he said bravely, though he wasn't entirely sure how they would manage it. Zira looked at him with an intensity that made him feel both uncomfortable and honored at once. "You are different from your kind," she said thoughtfully. "Thanks," Ethan replied uncertainly. She smiled faintly before turning back to watch the flames dance in silence, a rare moment of peace amid their uncertain circumstances. Little did they know that this fragile peace would soon be shattered by forces far beyond their control. Ethan Blake's cabin was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden walls and the distant rustle of snow falling from the trees. Zira stood by the window, her golden eyes scanning the pristine white landscape outside. She had been unusually tense since Ethan's neighbor, Ben, had visited earlier in the day. "They're coming," she said suddenly, her voice low and grim. Ethan looked up from his laptop, where he had been trying to work despite the strange circumstances. "Who's coming?" "My people," Zira replied, turning to face him. "The council will send hunters to retrieve me, or eliminate me." Ethan frowned. "Eliminate you? That's a bit extreme, isn't it?" "To defy the council is to challenge their authority," Zira explained. "They cannot allow my rebellion to inspire others." Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to process what she was saying. "So they'd rather kill you than let you live in exile?" "Yes," Zira said simply. Ethan sighed heavily. "Well, that's just great. So now I'm stuck in the middle of some intergalactic manhunt." Zira's expression softened slightly. "I did not intend to endanger you." "Yeah, well, it's a little late for that," Ethan muttered. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept replaying Zira's words in his mind. Hunters, elimination, rebellion. He glanced over at her sleeping form on the couch, wrapped in blankets like a cocoon. Despite everything, she seemed peaceful in her sleep. Suddenly, a faint hum broke through the silence, a sound so subtle that Ethan almost dismissed it as his imagination. But Zira bolted upright, her glowing eyes wide with alarm. "They're here," she whispered. Ethan froze. "What do you mean here? Who's here?" Zira didn't answer. She grabbed a metal rod she had fashioned from parts of his broken radiator, a makeshift weapon, and moved toward the window with feline grace. Ethan followed her cautiously and peered outside. At first, he saw nothing but snow-covered trees and shadows cast by the moonlight. Then he spotted them, small, hovering objects darting through the air like mechanical fireflies. "What are those?" he asked nervously. "Scout drones," Zira said grimly. "They are searching for me." Ethan swallowed hard. "Can they see inside?" "Not yet," Zira replied. "But if they detect my energy signature—" She didn't finish her sentence, but Ethan understood all too well what she meant. Over the next hour, Zira and Ethan worked together to fortify the cabin as best they could. Zira instructed him on how to disable the drones using tools from his workshop and guided him through basic combat techniques in case things escalated further. "You want me to fight alien robots?" Ethan asked incredulously, as she showed him how to wield a sharpened piece of metal like a spear. "If necessary," Zira replied matter-of-factly. Ethan shook his head in disbelief, but followed her instructions anyway. He couldn't deny that she seemed to know what she was doing. Her movements were precise and calculated, every action purposeful. By dawn, they had managed to disable 2 drones that had ventured too close to the cabin using traps Zira had set up around the perimeter. But it was clear that more would come. "We cannot stay here," Zira said as they stood outside surveying the wreckage of one of the drones. "And go where?" Ethan asked. "This is my home." "It is no longer safe," Zira replied firmly. Ethan sighed deeply but didn't argue. He knew she was right. Staying put would only make them sitting ducks for whatever was coming next. As they packed supplies into Ethan's old SUV later that morning, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness at leaving his cabin behind. It wasn't much, but it was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape from the chaos of life and focus on his work. Zira seemed to sense his reluctance and placed a hand on his shoulder. a gesture that surprised him with its gentleness. "You will return," she said softly, "once this is over." Ethan nodded but didn't reply. He wasn't sure if he believed her words or if she was just trying to comfort him. They drove for hours through snow-covered roads, heading toward a nearby town, where Ethan hoped they could find temporary shelter and regroup. But as they approached the outskirts of town, Zira suddenly tensed in her seat. "Stop," she commanded sharply. Ethan hit the brakes instinctively and looked at her in confusion. "What is it?" She pointed ahead with a trembling finger. "They are here." Ethan followed her gaze and saw several figures standing in the middle of the road, tall and imposing with metallic armor that gleamed under the sunlight. Their faces were obscured by helmets with glowing visors that matched Zira's golden eyes. "Telari warriors," Zira said quietly, her voice tinged with both fear and anger. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly as adrenaline surged through his veins. "What do we do?" "Fight," Zira replied without hesitation as she opened the car door and stepped out into the snow. "Wait," Ethan called after her, panic rising in his chest. But she didn't stop. She moved forward with unwavering determination, her makeshift weapon held high like a banner of defiance. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before grabbing one of their improvised spears from the backseat and following her into battle, a decision that would change his life forever. The cabin was quiet again after Ethan's tense encounter with his neighbor, Ben. Zira emerged from the bedroom, her violet skin catching the light as she wrapped a blanket around herself like a makeshift cloak. Her golden eyes were sharp, scanning the room for any signs of danger. "Your neighbor is curious," she said, her tone accusatory. "He's just being neighborly," Ethan replied, though he couldn't deny the knot of anxiety in his stomach. "He doesn't suspect anything." Zira didn't seem convinced. "Humans are unpredictable. If he discovers my presence, it could jeopardize everything." Ethan sighed and rubbed his temples. "Look, I get it. You're on edge, but we can't just keep hiding forever. We need a plan." Zira nodded slowly. "Agreed, but we cannot do this alone." Later that evening, Ethan made a call to his old friend Lila Torres, a tech-savvy hacker who owed him a favor. Lila was the kind of person who thrived on solving impossible problems, exactly the kind of ally they needed. When Lila arrived at the cabin a few hours later, she was bundled up in a heavy coat and carrying a backpack stuffed with equipment. Her sharp eyes immediately took in the state of the cabin. "And Zira." "Okay," Lila said, setting her bag down and crossing her arms. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why there's a purple alien woman in your house before I turn around and leave." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Zira stepped forward, her posture regal and commanding. "I am Zira of the Telari," she said firmly, "exiled warrior and fugitive from my people's oppressive regime." Lila blinked, clearly caught off guard by Zira's directness. She turned to Ethan with a raised eyebrow. "Is she serious?" "Dead serious," Ethan replied. "And we need your help." Lila hesitated for a moment before sighing and pulling out a laptop. "Fine, but you owe me an explanation, and probably several drinks, when this is over." Over the next few hours, Zira briefed Lila on her situation, while Ethan helped set up Lila's equipment. The trio worked together to analyze the wreckage of one of the scout drones they had destroyed earlier. "This tech is insane," Lila muttered as she examined the drone's circuitry. "Way beyond anything we've got on Earth." "It is Telari technology," Zira explained, "designed for precision and efficiency." "Well, it's impressive," Lila admitted, "but I think I can hack into its systems and disable their tracking signals." Zira tilted her head in curiosity. "You possess such skills." Lila smirked. "You'd be surprised what I can do with a laptop and some time." As Lila worked on hacking the drone, Ethan and Zira prepared for the possibility of another attack. Zira showed Ethan how to use some of her combat techniques more effectively while also teaching him about Telari weaponry. "You are improving," Zira said after Ethan managed to block one of her strikes during their sparring session. "Thanks," Ethan replied, panting slightly from exertion. "Though I'm pretty sure I'm still no match for you." Zira allowed herself a small smile. "Few are." As night fell, Layla finally cracked into the drone's systems and managed to disable its tracking signals. "There," she said triumphantly, leaning back in her chair. "That should buy us some time." Zira examined Lila's work with approval. "You are skilled indeed." Leela grinned. "I like her," she said to Ethan before turning back to Zira. "So what's next? Do we just wait for them to send more drones?" "No," Zira replied firmly. "We must take the fight to them." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Their main ship will be nearby," Zira explained. "If we can disable it, they will be forced to retreat." Leela frowned thoughtfully. "That's a tall order, but not impossible if we can figure out where they're hiding." "I can help with that," Zira said confidently. Ethan glanced between them, feeling both apprehensive and hopeful at the same time. They were an unlikely team, a human programmer, a hacker, and an exiled alien warrior. But together, they might just stand a chance against whatever was coming next. Later that night, as they sat around the fireplace discussing their plan, there was a rare moment of quiet between them. "You didn't have to help me," Zira said suddenly, addressing both Ethan and Leela. Ethan shrugged. "You didn't exactly give me much of a choice at first." Leela chuckled softly but then grew serious. "Honestly, I'm helping because this is bigger than just you or me or even Earth. If your people are willing to hunt you down here, what's stopping them from doing worse?" Zira nodded solemnly. "You are wise beyond your years." Leela smirked again, but didn't reply. Ethan glanced at Zira, and then at Lila before speaking up hesitantly. "We'll get through this. Together." For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zira allowed herself to feel something other than fear or anger, hope. But as they prepared for what lay ahead, none of them could have predicted just how much their lives would change in the days to come. The cabin was no longer the quiet sanctuary it had once been. Ethan, Zira, and Leela sat around the dining table, a makeshift war room now cluttered with tools, maps, and Layla's laptop. The tension in the air was palpable as they finalized their plan to confront the Tullari hunters. Zira's golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. She leaned forward, her voice steady but intense. "Their main ship will be stationed nearby, cloaked to avoid detection. If we disable its core systems, they will have no choice but to retreat." Leela tapped away at her keyboard, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've managed to triangulate their likely location based on the drone's flight paths. It's about 5 miles from here, deep in the forest." Ethan glanced at Zira nervously. "And how exactly are we supposed to take down an alien spaceship? I mean, no offense, but we're not exactly equipped for this." Zira's lips curved into a faint smile. "We have something they do not. Ingenuity." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's comforting." Leela smirked. "Don't worry, Ethan. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." She patted her laptop affectionately. The trio set out at dawn, bundled against the cold and carrying everything they could use as weapons or tools. Zira led the way, her movements swift and purposeful despite the deep snow. Ethan followed close behind, his breath visible in the frigid air, while Leela brought up the rear with a backpack full of gear. After an hour of trekking through the forest, they reached a clearing where the snow seemed untouched, too perfect, too pristine. "There," Zira said quietly, pointing to an area where the air shimmered faintly. "The cloaking field." Leela pulled out a small device she had rigged together from parts of the destroyed drones. "This should disrupt their cloaking long enough for us to get inside." As Leela activated the device, a low hum filled the air. The shimmering effect dissipated, revealing a sleek black ship that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was both beautiful and menacing. "Wow," Ethan whispered. "That's intimidating." Zira didn't hesitate. She motioned for them to follow her as she approached the ship cautiously. Inside the ship, the air was eerily silent except for the occasional hum of machinery. The corridors were sleek and metallic, illuminated by a soft blue glow. "This way," Zira whispered, leading them toward what she identified as the control room. As they moved deeper into the ship, they encountered their first obstacle, a pair of Telari warriors standing guard. Zira signaled for Ethan and Leela to stay back while she engaged them. The fight was swift and brutal. Zira moved like a shadow, her makeshift weapon striking with precision and force. Within moments, both guards were incapacitated. Ethan stared at her in awe. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Zira didn't respond. She was already moving forward. When they reached the control room, Layla got to work hacking into the ship's systems, while Zira and Ethan kept watch. "This is insane," Layla muttered as her fingers flew over the keyboard. "Their encryption is like nothing I've ever seen, but I think I can override it." "Hurry," Zira urged her. "They will have detected our presence by now." As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. "Great," Ethan said sarcastically. "Now what?" "Hold them off," Zira said simply as she moved toward the door to block any incoming attackers. Ethan grabbed one of their improvised weapons and positioned himself beside her. He wasn't a fighter by any means, but he wasn't about to let Zira face this alone. The first wave of Telari warriors arrived moments later. They were larger than Zira and heavily armored, but she fought with unmatched skill and determination. Ethan did his best to keep up, using his limited training to fend off attackers while trying not to get in Zira's way. Meanwhile, Leela worked frantically at the console. Sweat dripped down her forehead, despite the cold air, as she bypassed layer after layer of security. "Almost there," she muttered under her breath. One of the warriors broke past Ethan and lunged toward Leela just as she finished typing in a command sequence. Before he could reach her, Zira intercepted him with a devastating blow that sent him crashing into a wall. "You okay?" Ethan asked Leela breathlessly. "Yeah," she said shakily before grinning triumphantly. "And so are we. I've disabled their core systems." The lights flickered as Leela's hack took effect. The hum of machinery grew louder before abruptly cutting off. "They're vulnerable now," Zira said with satisfaction. "We must leave before they recover." The trio made their way back through the ship as quickly as possible, fending off more warriors along the way. By the time they reached the exit, all three were exhausted but alive. As they emerged into daylight once more, they saw smoke rising from hidden vents on the ship's exterior, a sign that Layla's sabotage had worked. "We did it," Ethan said incredulously, as he leaned against a tree to catch his breath. Zira nodded but didn't smile. Her expression was somber. "This is only temporary. They will return stronger than before." Ethan frowned. "So what do we do now?" Zira looked at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "I must leave." "What?" Ethan said sharply. "You can't just." "If I stay," Zira interrupted gently but firmly, "I will only bring more danger to you and your world." Leela stepped forward hesitantly. "But where will you go?" Zira glanced at the damaged ship behind them before turning back to face her new friends. "There are other worlds where I can hide, places where even my people cannot reach me." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat but forced himself to nod in understanding. "You'll come back someday, right?" Zira placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of affection from someone so guarded, and offered him a faint smile. "If I survive, I promise." Using parts salvaged from one of the disabled drones, Zira repaired an escape pod hidden within the larger ship's hull. As she prepared to leave Earth behind, Ethan and Leela stood by silently watching her work. When everything was ready, Zira turned to face them one last time. "Thank you," she said simply but sincerely. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but found himself unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Layla gave her a small salute instead. "Good luck out there." With that final farewell, Zira climbed into the escape pod and activated its launch sequence. Moments later, it shot into the sky like a comet until it disappeared from view entirely. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after everything they had experienced together. Ethan found himself staring at his laptop late one night with renewed purpose, working on a secret project inspired by what he had learned from Zira's technology. Meanwhile, Leela continued researching alien tech in secret while keeping an eye out for any signs of Telluri activity on Earth. And though neither of them knew when, or if, they would see Zira again, both held on to hope that their paths would cross once more someday among the stars.